Our next speaker is Niels Boeing. He is a journalist, author, and co-founder of Fab Lab Fabulous St. Pauli in Hamburg. He studied astrophysics and science theory and is a freelance science writer for major German media. He advocates a new bottom-up urbanism and an end to neoliberal urbanism and gentrification.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. Thank you for inviting me, for responding. And actually, I have to say, there were so many interesting points during the day, but we could already respond in 1 hour's length. I won't do that, of course. But maybe starting with what Jan van Heeswijk mentioned, this term right to the city, maybe in a short preface, and then I'm going to show you some examples. What is the context that we are operating in, or that we have this discussion? It's especially when it comes to cities, this political mission to transform them into creative cities. We have heard this term several times today. On the other hand, Jan has used a term that I'm very familiar with because I'm part of the network in Hamburg, that's right to the city, which is another vision. So the people of the city, they appropriate the city, they make the city, they reinvent it. So that we have two visions of a city today, of an urban landscape, competing for each other. I mean, the right to the city networks are not yet this strong, unfortunately. And all of this happening in a time of multiple crises. And I know that whenever I come to Greece, that the situation is much worse. We have no equivalent in Germany, but, well, Germany is somehow responsible for the depth of the crisis that you have to face, unfortunately. The other background is that we have this post-industrial society that stresses culture, services, creative industries, and that frames the discourse. And what is interesting of what I heard about other projects that were introduced shortly before, it even influences and frames the critical thinking about that. So whenever projects come up, in my eyes, they are very culture-centered, or even art-centered, I would say. I think that there's something missing. So art is even a resource or a market. That is something that I don't like at all. So what I want to show you in my 3 examples is, it's about the question, what can we produce? What should we be able to produce? How exactly is art relevant in this thing? And what do we need for this? To come to a different kind of production and city and maybe economy. Okay, this, what you see is a mobile phone. It looks a bit weird. Some would say it's steampunk. Actually, it's a mobile phone that we, with our Fab Lab in St. Pauli, which is a quite famous quarter of Hamburg, left and radical and prostitution, everything is there, and way too many tourists nowadays. We fabricated this DIY cell phone that was actually invented by, or constructed by some guy at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but as an open hardware. So you are free to assemble this, to download the software, everything. And we made this even, not only this one, but nearly 50 ones in a 4 weeks project near the harbor, where we set up a kind of manufacture for mobile phones. So what was the reason for this exercise? I mean, it looks a bit weird sometimes. The left one you wouldn't use with the spikes, but first thing was we could show everybody that it was a globalized product. You use it, you need it, everybody wants it. But what are the conditions? How it is made? Where do the materials come from? How are the labor conditions? Do you know anything about the inside of the product? And we want to show the people in an example that even they themselves, if they have no big knowledge, can, as a community, fabricate something complex like a mobile phone. It is not a smartphone, to be honest. It's more like a phone from '99, but you can phone with it and send text messages. So this is something I'd like to stress, that we have to come beyond this point where we only talk about creative industry in a sense how it is discussed today. We need to think about how can we produce tangible things, everyday things, even simple things like a pen or whatever, and not leave it to some industrial robots, automation, factories in Asia, I don't know where. Now, how does art come into play with this? Actually, when we wrote the application, because this was funded by the city of Hamburg, it was an art competition. Nobody of our team is an artist. But let's say personally, I've always been very fond of Joseph Beuys' thinking. And he says that there is no big need to keep up this division between engineering and art. Or we can even go back a bit further and say we have a division of art and craft many centuries ago, then craft into craft and engineering. And now we have three separate realms. Sometimes they touch, but normally they are considered as something unique in each respect. And I think we should overcome that. So I'd say, okay, art is relevant in the way that it's more like a mode of production. It has a different rationality of making things, different from what Horkheimer and Adorno called instrumental reason. You do art or you make art sometimes for the sake of its own, but the means end relation is completely different from when I make a product. So the process of work, how do I come to this thing, is different from when I produce it for the market. So this is what interests me about art the most. Neil Gershenfeld, he is the initiator of the Fab Lab concept. He invented that kind of community workshop with 3D printers and laser cutters and computer-controlled machines back in '98. Now there are about 900 to 1,000 worldwide. Compares this 3D machining, microcontroller programming to painting or writing a sonnet. So for him, art moves into the digital or high-tech realm in the 21st century. But of course, all of this does not come out of nothing. And so, I want to stress my third point in the title, fabrication, art, and spaces, or productive spaces. Of course, you need these spaces. And this is the common ground, for instance, with LABattoir, because we don't have enough of these spaces. What we did was just put up two containers in a park, which actually was the result of citizen planning in the late 90s. The city of Hamburg didn't want to have a park like that there. Just for the fun of it, gave it the shape of an old factory, even with a fog machine. And that was the entrance. And that's where the people in workshops produced these mobile phones. Mostly together. I mean, we had per workshop, we had 3 mobile phones produced. But in the end, 10 or 11 people were just doing it together. I had lots of fun. There were young people, old people, technicians, laymen, people who had never even touched electronics, something. And that was very interesting that it engaged so many different people, and even the neighborhood. That's something we hoped to reach, but it was beyond our expectation how it happened. So this is our Fab Lab in St. Pauli, and so my dream is that we will reach, let's say in 20 or 30 years, an infrastructure in all the bigger cities where every quarter has a big workshop hall like that, and we don't talk about anymore, is it engineering, is it art, is it craft? We just make things that we need. And spaces can even produce more beyond mere technology. This is the so-called Planbude. This is an urban planning space, but one that was set up by the citizens of St. Pauli against the will of the investor who bought a big housing complex on Reeperbahn, which is the red light district. The housing complex was torn down against the will of the inhabitants, of course. But there was so much protest in St. Pauli that in the end, politics decided to convince the investor, no, you have to plan it with the citizens. And this double container was the heart of this planning process. Two people were very important in this because they had invented this planning process let's say, with artistic tools before. Christoph Schäfer, Margit Zenki, some of you may know them. And so this is an example of that we need spaces even to make the city, to create the city, to reinvent the city. So we can make useful products or things, I prefer to call them things. We can make the city, or we can even think about making democracy. Oh, where's the last one? It's not there. Okay, I wanted to show you one more picture. It's missing, doesn't matter. It's about that we have started in St. Pauli 3 years ago to have more or less regularly quarter assemblies, because we say politics can't solve what we need or wish or demand. And Tanja Bruguera said citizens should start institutions themselves. That's exactly the spirit, how we do that. So this quarter assembly is quite offensively positioned as an extra constitutional alternative to the official assemblies or district parliaments. And is there some? Let me have a look of what I think I've touched everything I wanted. Maybe in the last turn, there was this question from the audience concerning the project that Samuel presented, critical concrete. How is this different from an art project, or is it not merely architecture business? I think this is a typical question that comes up very often. And as I said before, I really hope that we can manage to move beyond this division thinking, divided thinking. This is art, all this, put things in a drawer and then you have a label. I know that sometimes it's important for getting money. So what I can't say is how this creates new jobs. But I think it creates skills and experience and empowers the people if we move beyond the discourse that we had so far about creative cities, art, culture centers, and so on. I think we have to become a bit more radical in the next years. So how many time do I have left?
How much time is there left?
A minute 30.
Okay, no, but then let's use that for the discussion.
Great.
Thank you.